You perhaps might have a disorganized planning committee running loose in your head, and they're occasionally coming in and interrupting you, yelling at you about your business, yelling at you about your future, yelling at you about your decisions, but they're living rent-free in your head, creating chaos, and they're generally not good at giving business advice. In fact, most of them are not very positive and very nice to you.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Today is a solo episode. It's just you and me talking about your future. And I want to share with you a strategy that's really helped me in my life. It helped me grow my practice. It's helped me grow other areas of my life. And I like to call this concept my growth counsel. Now, as I walk you through it, I just want you to listen the first time. I've created a worksheet for you that will hopefully, at the end of this exercise, be something that will be helpful for you. You can download it, look at it, but I would not download it until you go through the entire episode, listen to what I'm saying, and then take it for a test drive. If it doesn't work for you, just throw it away. But if it does work for you, I'm going to encourage you to integrate it in your practice because it will help you grow. Now, it's done four things for me personally. One, it's allowed me to be far more creative. So when it comes to being a thinker, as a lawyer, I know how to solve legal problems. I can dive in. But as a business owner, sometimes I get jammed up. I can't think too creatively about certain problems. And so this particular technique, this strategy has allowed me to think more creatively. It's helped me shift my mindset where normally I would be stuck or frustrated with something and become more growth oriented, more of a growth mindset, quite frankly. Three, and this is my favorite, it's allowed me to solve certain types of problems quickly and cheaply. So it's allowed me to look at certain problems from a different way and quickly solve them and cheaply solve them in a way that I did not see the first time when I looked at the problem. And last but not least, it's allowed me to reduce some of the traffic, some of the head traffic, some of the noise in my head, some of the unnecessary chatter about certain things. And hopefully that'll become clear to you towards the end of the episode. Now, as we start to go through this episode, I'm going to encourage you to think about one problem you're having right now in your law firm. Now, if you're a team leader, it also applies to you. If you're an associate, no matter where you're at in life, I want you to think about what's that one problem right now that's kind of nagging and bugging you. Now, if you can, write it down. Write it down. Just go ahead and write it on a piece of paper. I don't care if it's a sticky note. I don't care if it's a cocktail napkin at a coffee shop. I don't care. Write it wherever. Doesn't matter. But write it down. But I really, really encourage you to write it down. And then we'll look at it towards the end of the exercise. But once you write it down, you kind of start to narrow the focus of the conversation as we work through concept today. Before I introduce the strategy, I want to share with you 4 lessons that allowed me to really understand and create the strategy. And then I'll share with you towards the end of the episode some of the science behind the strategy that I was totally unaware of and tripped over later in life. Here we go. I'm going to walk through the 4 lessons I learned that allowed me to create the growth counsel strategy. Lesson 1. When I was doing plaintiff's work, I really was struggling with cash flow one time, or more than one time, quite frankly. And I was trying to figure out whether or not I would put payroll on credit cards. And that was pretty stressful. I didn't have enough cash to cover payroll. These people were counting on me to take money home to, buy food and pay rent and car payments and house payments, those kinds of things. And I was short cash. A case I thought was going to settled, but I didn't get the check yet. And sometimes that happens. So I called my dad And I asked my dad, what should I do? Now, my dad was a FBI agent, SWAT team commander, had been a police officer. And my dad's usually a great source of advice. However, in this situation, my dad goes, son, I have no idea. I've never owned a business before. I've never been confronted with this type of a challenge. And boom, it hit me so hard. I realized it wasn't fair to my dad because he'd never been confronted by this type of a problem before. He's never experienced this type of problem before. So from that point forward, I realized my lesson or my takeaway is only take advice from people who'd been there and done that. So my father had not grown a business. My father had not tried to figure out how to make payroll with a credit card. That's something I don't recommend that you do, but it was a tough time. So it really led me on a path and kind of this first step towards being where I'm at today, which is who can help me think about growing my business. It's really what led me to hiring Mark Powers as my first coach. It really led me into exploring how to be a better business owner because I started realizing there are certain things I didn't know that I didn't know about growing a business. And so I realized the most important thing was to actually learn to take advice from people who had done it, not to take advice from people who did not. So college professors, teachers, friends who actually didn't own businesses were not great sources of advice. They were trying to help, but they actually knew nothing about the topic. It's the equivalent of taking, in my experience, marriage advice from a priest. They've never been married, but they seem to have a lot of advice about how to stay married. Okay, so let's go to lesson 2. Now, this is going to sound a little arrogant, but I promise you at the end, you're going to laugh at me because I got humbled in a very, very big way, in a very funny way. Back in the day, I used to do a lot of teaching for Atticus. I'd go out on the road probably 6, 8, 10, 12 times a year, teaching anywhere from 2 days to 3 days at different events on how to grow a practice, everything from hiring, firing, marketing, name it, I was doing it. And I had done it so often, I had developed some friends, people that would show up and hear me speak and talk. And they would come up to me at receptions and talk to me about how they're doing and what was working or not working about their practice. Well, this one special reception, a wonderful woman came up to me and said, hey, we put together a study group. And it's a group of women that are growing their practices. And we get together and we talk about different ways of supporting each other and growing practices. And we learn from each other. It's kind of like a cross between a mastermind group and a study group. And I'm like, that's really cool. That sounds great. She goes, well, we really relied on a lot of things we've learned from you. In fact, one of the things we've done is we've created bracelets. And the bracelets are, something that we all wear during the meeting. So, well, that's pretty cool. That sounds great. And then she showed me the bracelet. The bracelet said WWSRD. Now, I'm a little slow. It took me a minute. It took me a couple of minutes. In fact, she had to point out to me that WWSRD stood for What Would Steve Riley Do? Now, I blushed. I was incredibly moved and incredibly impressed and kind of shocked that I became more or less a benchmark, a prompt that they would use in their study group. When they were confronted with a problem, they would say, what would Steve do here? What would Steve do here? Now, a couple things came out of that. First and foremost, I became very, very serious about what I taught from that point forward. Up to that point in time, I was having a great time. I would go and talk to people. I would go and teach. And sometimes people would apply things. Sometimes they wouldn't. But at that moment, I realized that there was a group of women that got together and focused on how to grow their practices. And they used me as an imaginary prompt. Like, what would Steve do here in this situation? Now, of course, I encourage them to aim higher. There are far better people to probably use as a prompt. But it really impacted me deeply to really step away and go, wow, I need to really take my game at a whole nother level. Then on the airplane home, and it hit me what they were doing is pretty clever. They were using me as an invisible advisor, an invisible counselor. They were using me as a prompt in thinking about the growth of their practices. Now, I started thinking more about that, saying, wow, why can't I do the same thing? it never occurred to me to actually put together a imaginary advisors that I could say, what would this person do? And I started thinking, wow, I could actually put together kind of 2 or 3 advisors and ask myself, what would these people do in the growth of their practice? For me, lesson 2 became I could actually create my own board of advisors. Like, wow, I could create my own invisible virtual board of advisors. They could give me advice. I could run ideas by them. Then lesson 3 hit me. Lesson 3 hit me hard. Maybe it might have been the second bourbon on the airplane. I'm not really sure. But I realized I already had a planning committee. I already had a board of advisors that were kind of unplanned advisors that were running around loose in my head. They were offering random advice at any time. It kind of felt like a chaotic Zoom meeting with everybody unmuted, just yelling stuff and saying stuff at any time. Anyone could jump in and just say stuff. Now, if you think about this, everybody has this. And with a little bit of research and preparation for this, a psychologist would call this an internal monologue. It is the voice narrating your life and reflecting on your decisions. Now, of course, it can be a helpful tool for managing obstacles, and depending on how you manage the voice, it can be very, very powerful. However, in my case, I had some really mean inner critics and some very, very negative self talk. And it sometimes would be utilized by me to really motivate myself and try and, step up and be tougher and work harder. And I started realizing that some of these folks weren't particularly nice, and some of the folks weren't particularly asked to do this role in my life. So, what I started to do, and this is what I'm going to recommend to you, is I started to go, well, and this is my lesson 4, who is currently on your, or in my case, my unplanned planning committee? I had a planning committee that was running around loose in my head, giving me all kinds of advice. And I needed to figure out how to organize them and figure out what their roles were currently. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. And I'm not going to give them names because some of them were like a college basketball coach, some of them were a high school basketball coach. Some of them were a law school professor. Some of them were former employers. Some of them were former friends. Some of them were my mom. Some of them might be my dad. Some might be an uncle. But I'm going to organize them by types. All right. So just if you could, just let go of the name, but I'm going to give them kind of a personality, a role. The first one is the doubter. You're not good enough to pull this off. Why even try? Now, the doubter is that person that makes you think, I'm not good enough. Why should I even get out of bed? Why should I even make this attempt? Why should I do it? Then, of course, the critic. You always screw everything up. This is just going to be another failure. The next one is the comparer. Look how much better everyone else is doing. You'll never measure up. And then, of course, the perfectionist. If it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. Just wait until you're ready. And of course, with my personality, I'll wait a very, very, very long time because perfectionism is really 2 things. Number 1, waiting till it's perfect, which it never will be. And then fear, just fear that it won't be right. And so consequently, I procrastinate trying to make sure I can get it right before I pull the trigger. And then, of course, my failure coach. If you make the wrong move, everything will fall apart. Don't rock the boat. If you make the wrong move and you risk it, everything will fall apart. Now, I don't want to give names to these people, but they definitely have roles in my head. And what I realized was that they were kind of an uninvited, unorganized, unplanned future planning committee. So whenever I was looking at something, sometimes my old basketball coach would jump up and yell, "You'll never be good enough." Or sometimes my mom would say, "Man, it looks like a lot of risk. Maybe we shouldn't try it. It's too risky." So these voices, I'm going to assert, are running loose in everybody's head. And they're a normal part of how your brain works, is a normal part of how you work psychologically. It's normal. But what most of us have done, and what I was doing, is they were an unorganized, unplanned, unstructured, rabble rousing gang that was knocking me around and beating me up and not helping me actually move forward with my future. And so the big epiphany for me with these wonderful women that created this really great gift for me, it wasn't necessarily the gift of the bracelet, WWSRD, but the gift of the strategy that they've come up with. And I started thinking how brilliant it was. And why couldn't I adopt the same strategy in my life? So once I recognized that I had this unplanned planning committee kind of giving me advice about the future, I confronted some hard truth. Some of these voices needed to go. Not every voice deserves a seat at the table. And I start to fire and reallocate voices in my head. And then I start writing down who is on my unplanned planning committee whenever they start to show up. And then I started deciding, thank you, coach. You haven't coached me in a considerable period of time. I understand that you had opinions about whether or not I'd be a good enough athlete. But at this point in time, I don't need your advice to drive me anymore. I don't need to be driven by fear. I need to be driven by possibility. I need to be driven by what I perceive would be a great life or a great practice. I don't need to be driven by where I'm not good enough. I need to be driven by what I believe is my purpose in life and my mission in life and the mission of our company. So these lessons kind of left me with incredibly intriguing opportunity that I'm sharing with you. And it's what I'm proposing. You perhaps might have a disorganized planning committee running loose in your head, and they're occasionally coming in and interrupting you, yelling at you about your business, yelling at you about your future, yelling at you about your decisions, but they're living rent-free in your head, creating chaos, and they're generally not good at giving business advice. In fact, most of them are not very positive and very nice to you. So let's quit listening to them all the time. In fact, let's go put them in a conference room and tell them, go work on that project over there. Let's just kind of put them in a conference room in our brain and say, you go over there and work on that. Then let's put together an advisory team of people that we think would be helpful for us. Let's make sure they first have the experience that we need and that we respect their advice. We look up to them. So that's really what I did. I took a step back and I started to build a growth council. And that's what I called it. It was the best name I had at the time. And I put together different people on my growth council, depending on what the problem was. Now, I'm going to walk you through how to do this. And I'm going to encourage you to try it. Just try it for a couple of times. I'm going to give you the steps to do it, and then I'm going to give you an example. Hi, Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how a practice advisor works, if you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. So to build your growth council, choose an area of focus. Think about first, what do I want to focus on? 2, select your advisors that can help you solve that problem. 3, frame your problem or prompt. 4, start with journaling. And when I say journaling, I mean handwritten journaling, because it'll engage your brain in a particular way and allow you to think about this in a particular way. I'll give you some tips at the end. Now, some of you will be tempted to jump to ChatGPT or some other AI tools. I'm going to recommend you don't go there yet, because this is first and foremost a tool about expanding your thinking, about expanding your creativity, about expanding your mindset. So the work that you need to do here is first between your ears before you go and try and do a shortcut through ChatGPT. I'm going to recommend that you use a pencil and a piece of paper and write it out. I promise you that's where the real juice is at. That's where the gold is at. So let's go through a practical example. Let's say right now you come back to your office and you're thinking about how am I going to grow? How am I going to build my practice? You walk into a client complaint, and the client complaint is, why can't you or your team update me on the status of my case? Relatively simple client complaint, but a client complaint nonetheless. And you kind of come in and you get a gut punch like, oh man, I can't believe that they're complaining about that. We're doing all this work on this case. We're doing all the work and we're not really sure. How can they just not trust us that we're doing great work for them? Well, because they woke up that morning, they were stressed about it and they're worried about their case and they hadn't heard anything from you. So they called and complained, like, why do I have to call to complain to get updated about my case? And so you get a knot in your stomach. You're like, oh man, I'm sick to my stomach about this. Like, I hate this. And it happens a couple times a month. Well, this is a problem. It's one of the things that's going to prevent you from growing your practice. Client complaints, when they're given to you, are opportunities to learn how to improve your practice, improve your customer service. So you can take those complaints and turn them into raving fans so they refer you work rather than tear you down. So now you've got this complaint. Let's take it and work with it. And let's just say for fun, your growth council might include 3 people. First, let's select Mark Powers because I've used Mark Powers a lot on my growth councils. And I like Mark. Mark's a terrific guy. He's got great values. He and I have been friends for forever. But he's a good business person and he does a great job being client-centric. And then for a different perspective, let's get Patty Paz. Now, Patty's been on a couple of our episodes. Patty is one of our practice advisors. She was a team leader for Mark White, really did a great job. She runs our team leader program. But Patty also teaches the empowered team consultation process. So she's got a completely different perspective on being front facing with clients. So she has a team leader perspective, an intake specialist perspective. And then for fun, we'll put me on it. We'll put me on it because, well, I have a bracelet and that's something. So I actually never got the bracelet as I think about it, but I have a picture of the bracelet if that counts for something. So you put the 3 of us on the panel in your head and you sit down and you write the question. How can I improve my client communication so we can keep our clients updated? And you sit down and you say, well, what would Mark Powers say about this? And so you write out, Mark Powers would say you have to build a system around this. You just can't randomly update clients. You have to think through what's your system for updating clients. And then what would Patty say about this? Well, Patty will say you have to manage client expectations. Did you tell the client you would update them? When did you tell the client you would update them? Did you tell the client you would update them? What was the expectation on the intake? What's the client's expectation? These are good questions. And then I would say, from the moment that you started marketing to this prospect and they became a client, did anyone talk to them about how long the case would take? And did anyone talk to them about what to expect as far as when the case would be resolved, what they would have to pay, what would it look like? Now, you may think you have, but a lot of stuff happened during that whole process. So the client may be at a point where they're confused and lost. So you may be prompting, what would Steve say? Well, Steve might say, why don't you set up a system, which is what Mark suggested, that touches base with the client proactively twice a month. You schedule 2 15-minute Zoom meetings with the client, and that way you tell the client, we're going to have a Zoom meeting this week, and then 2 weeks from now, again for 15 minutes, and that 15-minute meeting will update you on what's going on with your case. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer. What I'm saying is that's the process for your growth council to help you problem solve quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. Now, when you're done with the meeting with your growth council, you write down 3 action steps. In this case, you might say, I'm going to create automated updates with my case management system 2, I'm going to improve my client onboarding package with frequently asked questions of what they can expect from us and when to expect it from us. And I'm going to now train my team on how can we proactively communicate and update the client on the status of their case. It might be a great topic for a team meeting. That's just a practical example of how this works. I'm going to give you some more tips in a minute. But there's actually some science and history behind this concept. I didn't realize at the time. I just started experimenting with it because I figured these brilliant women were doing it. Sounded like a great idea. I mean, they even created jewelry around it. I mean, seriously. So I used this concept probably for 10 to 15 years, but in my real estate business, I've used it in my life. I've used it as a parent. I've used it in Atticus. I've used it all the time when I'm stuck with something and I'm not sure how to solve the problem. So I write out the issue. I think about who I'd like to have on my advisory committee here, in this case, the Growth Council. And then I kind of pretend that they're talking to me and I'm getting their advice. In preparing for this particular episode, I actually researched how this works. I'd never researched it before. I never thought I would talk about this publicly, but I've talked about it a couple of times in workshops and people are intrigued by it. So I decided to go for a solo episode and just talk to you about it and see what your thoughts were. In the research, I was shocked to find a very famous author, wrote about this a long, long time ago. His name was Napoleon Hill, and he called this process his invisible counselors. In chapter 14 of his book, Think and Grow Rich, he calls it the sixth sense, if you want to check it out. Napoleon Hill said that he imagined himself sitting at a table with historical figures like Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Edison and used their wisdom to guide his decisions. Now, at the time, he had a problem with a tire, not his personal tire, but a product. And he wanted to brainstorm. And he believed that he could tap into the creativity and problem solving that allowed him to surpass his own conscious mind. He explained it this way, and here's the quote. Just before going to sleep at night, I would shut my eyes and see in my imagination this group of men, notice men, he didn't have any women, I realize that, but it was an old book, all right? It's an old book. Don't take it out on me, but that's what Napoleon, but men. Seated around me at my council table. Here I had not only an opportunity to sit among those whom I considered to be great, but I actually was able to dominate the group by serving as their chairman, which I thought was an interesting thing. This practice allowed me to stimulate conversations with brilliant minds and arrive at innovative ideas. So it was interesting when I read this and I said, wow, Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich use his technique of invisible counselors as a way of creatively problem solving. And then I did a little bit more work and did a little bit more digging and discovered that in psychology, this particular technique is called reflective thinking. And it's used by psychologists to practice reflective thinking, or sometimes metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking, the ability to step back, observe the thoughts, and assess them critically. And reflective thinking helps you recognize patterns, challenge assumptions, and approach problems with a fresh perspective. So in my case, I tripped over the Growth Council as an essential way of structuring reflective thinking for me. Now, there are a couple other principles that are obvious. I'm not going to get too deep in them. One, obviously, is metacognition, because this is a technique to allow you to think about your thinking. Two, it allows a positive self-talk to redirect your inner dialogue into focused, productive brainstorming. And third, it allows you to do cognitive reframing, changing how you perceive particular challenges by imagining advice from people that you respect. So ultimately, the role of this technique in creative problem solving is pretty well established. It shows from stepping outside your usual pattern thoughts, something like a growth council, whether composed of real mentors or fictional characters or historical figures. It allows you to break free from linear thinking. It allows you to kind of switch the hat that you're wearing, so to speak, and brainstorm on unconventional and different solutions. Now, let's go ahead and pull all this together. Some of you are like, oh my God, Steve has totally lost it. He's just totally lost it. I told you he's hearing voices. I totally get it. But I think I'm with good company here. Napoleon Hill's written one of the greatest books, not greatest books, but one of the best-selling books of all time, and is known as probably the godfather of self-development thinking. And his book is called Think and Grow Rich. So he does a lot of work around thinking about how to grow rich. And today's episode is about helping you grow your practice, make more money, solve problems. So this is a pretty interesting technique and strategy. So as I pull it together, I'm going to give you some basic tips. I'm going to first and foremost encourage you to call your group whatever you want that you find fun. You can call them the Brain Trust, the go-to team of brilliant minds to help you tackle your biggest challenges. You could call them the Strategy Squad, a focus team to help you map out and execute your business. You could call it the Inner Circle of Growth. You could call it the Think and Grow Rich team. You can call it the Visionaries Roundtable, the Scaling the Summit. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you organize this group in a particular way and you give them a name so that you can trigger that name and trigger this thought process whenever you need to it. Now, you can create councils, advisory committees, and boards for any area of your life. I've done it for health and fitness. I've done it for spirituality. I've done it for parenting. I've done it for being a better parent, a better real estate investor, a better partner, a better coach. I've done it for a variety of different things. But for you, I want you to think about any area that you want to make progress on. So when we started the episode, I asked you to write down one issue that you're dealing with in your practice. So let's do the exercise together. My suggestion is to write the issue down. It's got to be in writing, pen, pencil, not typing. Then write the question, issue, or prompt in a way that frames it properly. Then set a timer and write for 15 minutes. Now, you're going to be tempted that when you're done with 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you're going to walk away. But that's not what I want you to do. I want you to identify your 3 advisors, and I want you to think through what each one of those advisors would have to say about the issue, and then write down what their recommendations are. Then at the end, pick 3 steps, just 1, 2, 3. Now, for me, I usually write down what's the easiest thing I can do, what's the quickest thing I can do, and sometimes I write down what's the cheapest thing I can do. So I go to fast, easy, cheap on actions, because I want to create momentum quickly. So fast, easy, cheap is quickly easy for me. And I usually have a tendency to go the most complicated and hardest first. So I've taught myself over the years to go quick, fast, and cheap so I can move the problem along quickly. Now, that's it. It's pretty straightforward. You write the problem out. You work on it for a minimum of 15 minutes. You let your advisors, I typically advise about 3, no more than 3. You can do probably up to 5 or 6. 7's too complicated, but for me, I like to have 3, maybe 4, depending on the problem. And then I work on it for a good 15 minutes. Now, you want to turn off any distractions. You want to step away from the computer. You want to step away because really what matters here is a good 15-minute focused session on the problem. And then try it. My suggestion is to try it at least 3 times a week for a quarter. So 15 minutes, 3 times a week. You can do more if you want. My experience is if you do about 3 times a week for 15 minutes, it takes about a month. So you'll do it 12 times and you'll basically realize, wow, this is actually working for me. Like it really works for me. So give it a shot, try it. And as I wrap up, I'm going to encourage you to download the worksheet, which is included in the show notes. And I'm going to give you kind of 3 things to think about and a little quote to end us with. The first thing, it is an imaginary game, but that's the point. Either way, you have a narrative going on in your head. Either way, you have either unorganized, mean people yelling at you about things that really aren't relevant anymore. And if you recognize that, you can put them into a little conference room and lock the door. You can leave them there if you want, but you have the capability of using your brain to organize it in a very powerful way to solve complicated problems quickly. What this strategy will give you the ability to do is do it quick and easily in a very powerful way. Now, occasionally somebody will barge into your meeting, and when they do, and sometimes my mom does, sometimes my dad does, sometimes my old basketball coach does, I say thank you. Thanks for sharing. I escort them out of the room and I get back to focused on the problem. So I know it sounds silly, but trust me, it works. Number two, you're going to have a self-narrative running at all times anyway. It's part of how your brain works. So put it to work. Instead of letting it do random acts, put it to work. Make it useful. Make it pay the rent. Consciously organize your thinking and focus. So instead of having chaotic, unproductive noise, you take that brain of yours and start having it focus on problems that are impactful for you. Last but not least, in my experience, has been a game changer. But it's only a game changer if you try it. It can't be a game changer if you think about it. So this is important. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the money's at. If you listen to this episode and go, well, that's kind of crazy, or that's good, or that's cute, that's fine. Just don't even worry about the episode. Don't ever try this exercise. But if you're like, this is a little wacky, but I'm going to give it a shot. You have to give it a shot. You can't think about it. So you only can make this work as if you do the work. So you literally have to sit down and try the exercise. And my suggestion, once again, try it for at least a month straight and see how it works for you. This is not one of those things in life that you can get a result from by thinking about it. This is one of those things in life that you get the result from actually doing it. So I'm going to encourage you to try it. For me, it's been a game changer. So my final thought on this is from one of my favorite authors, a guy named Paulo Coelho. He's written a whole bunch of books, a Brazilian author, brilliant guy. And there's this great quote that he has. And I'm going to read it to you, and then I want to talk about it for a second. When we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. The first step and the greatest battle is the one between your ears over that narrative, unfocused conversation that's between you and a whole bunch of people, some that are dead, some that are no longer part of your life, some that should never be part of your life. Some of you are still talking to your ex-spouses. I don't know why. Some of you are still talking to your ex-partner. Some of you have ex-clients you're carrying around that are haunting you. They're ghosts. They need to go. And if you're going to put somebody there, let's put together a team of advisors that you can train your mind to use to solve productive problems and help you grow your practice. So the first step is to actually try the exercise, because the greatest battle is going to be between your ears. With that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as always, thank you for being part of our great practice and our great life. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode can help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.